Pratik, can we go ahead?
So just a second. Let me do just a second.
Pratik, can we go ahead now?
Yes, sir. You can. The session is started.
Good evening, respected doctors. I am Rup Kumar, General Manager, Marketing, Linax Laboratories. On behalf of Linax Laboratories, I take immense pleasure to invite all of you wholeheartedly for a learning and sharing session on new horizons in the management of depression, chaired by Dr. C. Ramasubramanian, moderated by Dr. G. Prasad Rao sir, and sessions covered by Dr. M. Suresh Kumar sir, Dr. Prasad Rao sir, and Dr. Jagdish sir. I also welcome all the participants, chairpersons, and moderators in 11 hybrid centers across South and West India. And to save time for the much awaited sessions, without further ado, I hand over the meeting to Dr. Prasad Rao sir. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Rup Kumar. And it's really my pleasure to first introduce our chairperson of the day. Who does not know Dr. C. Ram Subramaniam? There is a small story which most of you don't know about CRS. One day, when Lord Vishnu and Lord Brahman were talking between themselves, Brahman was taking a minute off. Now that was the time when Vishnu came across and said, because Brahma is the Lord Vishnu's son, said, no, we need to now have a psychiatrist. We need to have a person who works with the downtrodden. We need to have a person who works with the mental health. We need to also create a family who will work for the psychiatric illness. So without battling an eye, Lord Brahma has immediately said, no, I have that person in mind. I'm already just packaging him down. So that's how CRS came to this earth. Now, coming to the earth, CRS, when anyone talks to CRS, first thing you come about is he is such a person who is so unassuming, so polite. He keeps saying sir to everybody. Even to his most junior psychiatrists I've seen, how are you, sir? And all. My own luck is to work with him for 2 months. And during the 2 months, I learned how to live in this world. And this is not untrue. I was in the ICMR Advanced Center for about 1.5 months. And CRS was with me with late Professor Venkobrao, and the CRS taught me a lot of things in the world. So without much ado, that's that wonderful person. I know I can keep reading his, but the basic thing is he's a great human. He has done human service in the psychiatric rehabilitation services, not only in Madurai, but I think down south Tamil Nadu, at wherever the district mental health program, you don't need to name the program, but he works for the police, he works for the rehabilitation group, he works for the district mental health group, he works for just free psychiatrists. And if I call him, I would always feel shy to call him because he will be in some important meeting with the judges or the police or the government of the day. CRS, this is my real pleasure to invite you. Now you are the chairperson, and I invite you to this, and then I ask you to conduct the program. Thank you, CRS.
Thank you, Prasad Rao, for your rich compliment. Friends, respected organizers, and my colleagues, thank you very much for giving an opportunity to chair this important session in which three icons of Indian Psychiatric Society, Dr. Suresh Kumar, Dr. Prasad Rao, and Dr. Jagdish, they are going to share their experiences about the newer antidepressant which comes to the market. My dear friends and ladies and gentlemen, before handing over the session to the speakers, I want to share some of my ideas about the history of antidepressant therapy. In the past 30 years, there is a silent revolution is going on in the field of psychiatry, and especially in the biological aspect. All psychiatric illnesses treatable, curable, and preventable, provided if you identify the illness very early and if you initiate the treatment very quickly, and especially if it is coupled with the proper rehabilitation, the recovery will be total. The concept of biological model came into being from the year 1953. In fact, most of the antidepressants, antipsychotics were discovered by accident. And you'll be surprised to know that in 1953, at that time, tuberculosis was a pandemic, random, and everybody was affected by the tuberculosis. At that time, there was only one drug is available, that is INH. And they give the INH, the people are responded very well. But unfortunately, most of the people, they have developed certain psychiatric complication, which is similar to affective disorder or manic phase. And at that time, that side effects was used for the therapeutic effect. And that was the birth of antidepressant therapy. It was really a history. Then came the discovery of tricyclic antidepressants, especially in the year 1959. In the year 1959, after the successful discovery of chlorpromazine and more search for potent psychotics were initiated. And in fact, you'll be surprised to know that imipramine was derived from the promethazine by substituting sulfur bridge of the phenothiazine ring with an ethylene bridge. It was quite accidental. Although imipramine does not exhibit psychotic properties to the patients with schizophrenia, and they addressed the apathetic nature of the illness, and also it addressed the psychomotor retardation. Then they found that this is an ideal antidepressant therapy. So that brings the discovery of tricyclic antidepressant in the history of antidepressant therapy. See, you'll be surprised to know that tricyclic antidepressants are named based on their structure, that is 3-benzene ring, whereas other antidepressants were named on the mechanism of actions. Then came the SSRI and the SNRI and the bupropion, that is atypical antidepressant, bupropion in 1989, and the SNRI in the 1993. Then SPARI, that is serotonin partial agonist and reuptake inhibitor, the inhibitor in 2011, that is Velazolone. Then came the NMDA, that is the competitive NMDA receptor antagonist, that is the ketamine and other things. moratorium of other newer antidepressant, it has entered the scene. That is a vortioxetine. Now there is called the Vortica by Linux. And in fact, about which Dr. Prasad Rao, he is going to talk about the real evidence about the efficacy of that drug. And Dr. Suresh Kumar, he is going to talk about the current unmet needs in pharmacological management of depression. And Jagdish sir, and he is going to talk about the new advantage in terms of side effects in management and efficacy of vortioxetine. Now, I don't want to sit in front of the affluent and efficient speakers and you. And now, I request Dr. Suresh Kumar to speak about the current unmet need in the pharmacological management of depression. And again, to introduce Suresh Kumar to this august audience, just like introduce MGR to the Tamil population, or because he is such a wonderful person, he is a senior psychiatrist, and he is a passionate teacher, one of the very powerful teachers, and still he continues teaching. He is teaching his passion. And usually, Suresh Kumar, he will chair the session. For a change, now today, I occupy the position. Thank you, Suresh Kumar, for giving me this opportunity. Now I request Suresh Kumar to speak about the current unmet need in pharmacological management of depression. Over to Suresh Kumar, sir.
Thank you, sir. Give me a minute to share the screen. I hope I'm audible.
Both audible and visible.
Okay, thank you so much. I am very delighted today, primarily because I'm sandwiched between the top experts in the country, a very dedicated Dr. CRS, who actually is a very inspiring soul to all of the psychiatrists, and Dr. Prasad Rao, an extraordinary academic person who had contributed so richly in the field, and Dr. Jagdish, who's doing such a human service. Combining academic work with clinical work is not an easy job in a private sector. He's doing it so well. So I'm so delighted to be sandwiched between these experts. Truly, it's going to be a learning and sharing session for me. And what I want to talk for the next 20 minutes is to just give you a glimpse of what are the unmet needs we have in the pharmacological management of depression. And I think first I'll start with depression as a global crisis. We are not talking about an uncommon problem. We are talking about an extremely prevalent condition. Perhaps it's one of the commonest psychiatric disorders that people experience. To translate it in terms of numbers, the lifetime prevalence of depressive disorder is 16.2%, which means about 1 in 6 of us will experience a depressive episode sometime during our lifetime. So the vulnerability for all of us is greater. About 1 in 16 will experience depression in the past year. So that's a 12-month prevalence is rated as 6.6. This is a global figure. This is given in Kufa. It's one of the fantastic authors who writes about depression, everything about depression, and is one of the publications from Lancet I always keep about quoting him. If you look at the prevalence of depression, unfortunately, is about twice common in women as compared to men. And many people with this disorder, it's not an ordinary disorder, it's not a cloud which comes and goes as we used to believe. It is always a recurrent and often a chronic course it runs. That is why it causes so much of a disability to people with a lived experience of depression. These are the recent figures from India. India, a group of collaborators working with mental disorder, calculated for the first time the disease burden, taking the data from 2017, and they arrived and said the prevalence of depressive disorder in both sexes together is 3.3%. That's a very conservative estimate. And if you compare the males versus females, it's 2.7% versus 3.9%. Obviously, it's almost double in the women compared to men. If you translate in terms of numbers, about 46 million people in this country are with the lived experience of depressive disorder. That's a huge number, daunting number for mental health professionals to deal with. So I kind of outlined to you what's the extent of the problem that you're facing with regard to depression. Is it an ordinary disorder? Unfortunately, no. It's quite a disabling disorder. And the disability, if you calculate worldwide, in 1990, it was ranked as the third most disabling disorder, just behind the low back pain and iron deficiency anemia, contributed mostly from South Asia. But the list has become very different in 2013, where major depressive disorders have become the second in the list. The prediction is, in few years' time, major depressive disorder will emerge as the most disabling disorder among all disorders. That's going to be really, really sad for all of us. If you look at it in terms of what is the percentage of total disability adjusted life years, what we call as DALYs, due to depressive disorders in Indian setting. If you look at depressive disorders as a whole, which combines both major depressive disorder and dysthymia, is about one third. One third of the people have a total disability adjusted life years. So it's about 33.8%. Again, it's more in females. If you just take only major depressive disorder, it's more than a quarter, 26.7%. And if you take women, it's 30.6%. And dysthymia is relatively less disabling, contributing about 7%. In women, it contributing to 8%. So major depressive disorder still is a very disabling disorder. And I think we need to pay attention to it by providing early interventions. Just have a quick look. This is selling coal to Newcastle, telling psychiatrists what the criteria for depression. I just want to remind people there are 9 criteria that are enumerated in DSM-5, which are the classical ones we use even in a PHQ questionnaire. The PHQ questionnaire, PHQ-9, we normally employ to diagnose depression in outpatient clinic, comprises of these 9 questions. And it's a very easy way to say whether somebody has a depressive disorder or not. Now, we all know that it is a very clinically heterogeneous disorder. The most baffling thing is it's got emotional symptoms, it's got cognitive symptoms, it's got physical symptoms. For a long period of time, psychiatrists have been focused primarily on the emotional symptoms, whether it is anxiety, sadness, inappropriate guilt. Those are the kind of things which we usually are worried about and talk about. And those are the ones that are easy to target with the current antidepressants. Whereas people also experience significant number of cognitive symptoms, particularly with regard to their short-term memory and long-term memory, with regard to their executive functioning, the way they can plan and organize things, their decision-making, their judgment. So all these are quite disturbed in individuals with depressive disorder. That could be one of the important factors which contributes to disability in comparison with emotional symptoms. And in addition, people experience a lot of physical symptoms. Nimans Bangalore looked at a study about 15 years ago in 2000, and they said the commonest symptom in depression, which is not found in the DSM-5 list, is actually pain. People come with all kinds of pain. Pain from stomach, pain in big bodily pains. I think pain is a token for entry for a lot of people to the psychiatric clinic. And in addition, people have disturbance in vegetative symptoms, whether it is to do with appetite, either eating less or eating more, or sleeping less or sleeping more. So or fatigue, very important symptom. So there are a combination of emotional, cognitive, and physical symptoms in this heterogeneous disorder. That is why if you see in clinic 2 consecutive patients with the lived experience of depressive disorder, they might have an entirely different presentation. Yet we make the depressive disorder in both. That's a confusing thing for a lot of initial beginners. So say you have totally different criteria. He sleeps a lot. This person is not sleeping. He eats a lot. He doesn't sleep. He doesn't eat at all. And he's been losing weight. And this person is always talking about guilt. This person doesn't talk about it. This person presents with hopelessness. Other one does not. And then you will yet make the difference diagnosis as depressive disorder. I think we need to first talk about what are the challenges in current treatment, which will pave way for Dr. like Prashad Rao and to Jagdish to talk about why we require new medications. Now, when we talk about the challenges in the current treatment, just this is another slide taken from Coffert's work. From 1990, he has been showing the slide. The beauty of the slide is, in so many decades, this trajectory hasn't changed. Nothing has changed the trajectory. You begin with no lived experience of depression. Symptoms begin to appear, but yet you are not called as a disorder, and you only have mental health concerns at this point in time. And then it crosses the threshold, critical threshold, and it progresses. Then it becomes a syndrome, depressive syndrome, and emerges as a depressive episode. And in the episode, somebody presents to you, you are interested in managing the acute phase of it. Often we used to be thinking in the beginning, I used to think in the 1970s and 80s, easy to deal with depression. Somebody comes with acute phase of depression, I'll give him imipramine, everything vanishes, and I will give him a very lot hope and then come back. And then that did I realize that if I stay on in psychiatry for a few years, these people will keep coming back and back again to us. So acute phase of treatment is one thing. There, we want people to respond to the treatment we provide, which is even 50% of the symptom reduction. But you really have to achieve remission. The remission is the goal in anything, because only a remission can predict recovery. Your goal today is to achieve recovery. That can only happen when all symptoms are not there, when a person is asymptomatic, not when he's having a residual symptom. A lot of people, after response, they can relapse, and then they have to continue with the treatment. This is a challenging thing. People come and ask, how long are we supposed to take the treatment? It's a very tricky question. I still haven't found the right answers. And it's the most confusing answer for a clinician to give a concrete answer and say how long the person would require continuation in the very beginning. Over a course of time, we'll be able to predict. The continuation then is going into the phase of maintenance. Even after the, like a person attained the full recovery, so to say, suddenly after a few years, people have a recurrence of the disorder. That's also, when somebody sits in practices for decades together, like Dr. CRS or Prashad Rao, you realize that somebody who is fully recovered sometimes also goes back to recurrence. So this is a complex disorder. Over a period of time, the trajectory changes a lot. Now, the sad part of the current treatment is that this 1/3 law is very applicable in psychiatry. 1/3 of the patients who are with the lived experience of depressive disorder, with the current management that we have, don't have any benefit, do not receive benefit. Those are the unfortunate ones, and we just don't know how to help them. 1/3 do not experience complete remission. The fortunate are the last 1/3 who recover beautifully, and then, they thank you merrily forever. And then, so obviously, the treatment-resistant depression is a very important clinical challenge for all of us. So, as I said earlier, initially, we might look for symptom improvement, which occurs readily, which is response, but we must achieve remission with our treatment. Only with remission, you can lead on to the, recovery for this individual. There is still a lot of unmet need. One of the important things is, even in the most developed country like United States, half of the people with the lived experience of major depressive disorder are not receiving treatment. This is the American Psychiatric Association announces this. If you translate into India, I wonder how many of the people with the lived experience of depression would actually be receiving evidence-based treatments. They may be treating themselves with so many things. We did recently a study among young people, how they go. The journey is very complicated. Young people with the lived experience of depression go and meet so many people, experience so many non-evidence-based interventions. And then only finally, when they really think they can't cope with that, that's when they knock on the doors of mental health professionals. It's only when somebody in the family had a mental health issue, or somebody who had walked them like a general practitioner at the very early stage, or a family member who educated them, only then the journey is shortened. For a lot of people, this journey is very tumultuous. And I think in this country, still large number of people are not under treatment. The 45 million people that I talked about, I think a majority of them are not under treatment. In the STAR-D study, people said 50% of the treatment are unresponsive to the initial treatment that you provide. Whatever you started off, 50% responded. 40% of the people experience significant side effects. This is the greatest concern experienced by people with the lived experience of depression. They come back and say, you give me medication, I have a sexual problem. I am fatigued. I'm sleeping all the time. I'm agitated. So I think people want to stop. In no other medicine, people are really keen on stopping the medicine as soon as they become all right. Diabetics don't do that. Hypertensives don't do that. Asthmatics don't do that. They're happy to continue. Whereas when it comes to people with the lived experience of depression or anxiety, the first thing they say, when do you stop the medication, doc? Is it not addictive? You're going on prescribing this. It's a very challenging question for all of us, including general practitioners ask us the questions, not really just the family members. So there are, at the moment, the most important treatment we provide as a first-line evidence in India at the moment is not tricyclic antidepressants any longer. It is SSRI treatment. But even with the SSRI treatment, which is very good, it still have limitations. As study trial said, 1/2 are unresponsive. The remission rates after the first trial with an SSRI is only happens with the third, and about 2/3 improve after 3 more trials. So cumulatively over a period of time with combinations and juggling, cocktails are allowed in depression treatment. This is one place we can keep on combining medication more and more, combine SSRI with SNRI and another drug. And then even then about 2/3 of the people only improve. There are very few adults who would say, in between the depressive episodes, I was fully non-symptomatic, I was fully functional. People don't say that. They are suboptimally functioning often. So in other words, residual symptoms seem to be extraordinarily common. So the inadequate response to the SSRI also has a problem because it leads to relapse. So the recurrence rate, if you look at depression overall, is 40 to 85%. So this is a daunting challenge for all of us compared to many other chronic disorders. So one of the things we need to remind ourselves is, if you follow people over months, even after the so-called remission has occurred, for example, if you use a rating scale like HMAD, Hamilton, like a rating scale, and you say this person has a less score of less than 8, so you say he's asymptomatic in the like Hamilton depression rating scale. But still, even after the person is remitted, 75% of the people have residual symptoms. Only a quarter do not have residual symptoms. Please understand, people with residual symptoms are the ones who are more likely to relapse. So we need to find a way where we can even clear those residual symptoms. The person's actually become asymptomatic, not just score of a 8 or less. Cognitive symptoms is another biggest challenge. If you look at the people with lived experience over a period of time, for about, let's say, 3-4 years, you follow them up, a lot of people have symptoms, residual symptoms. Most of the residual symptoms are cognitive symptoms, are in the area of cognitive domain, are in the physical area, sometimes in the other areas. So I think the cognitive symptoms and physical symptoms persist for long periods of time than we wanted them to be. So this is another challenge. Cognitive symptoms persisting even during periods of remission. So even during the acute phase, when somebody presents with the first time depressive disorder, almost 94% of the people have cognitive symptoms. I feel in a clinical setting, we can easily decide when somebody has a cognitive symptom or not by just asking them questions about, do you concentrate, blah, blah, all that. But I think you give a digital symbol substitution test. That's a very sensitive test. It only takes about 2 minutes to give the test. You give this digital symbol substitution test, you suddenly realize people have so much problem with the speed with which they can perform the task, that the way they progress with the task, the ability to concentrate, the ability to finish the whole thing, everything gets disturbed. So obviously cognitive disturbances happen very early in the disorder. And they continue to happen even after remission. As I said earlier, on an average, up to 40% of the people continue to have cognitive symptoms even during periods of remission. So what is the impact of these cognitive symptoms remaining? Obviously, as I said earlier, the disability is more contributed by cognitive symptoms. Look at a depressive disorder person who's in work life, working in an NGO or working in a BPO, working in a computer place, or working as a doctor, or as a student in a school. He loses focus, and there is obviously loss of productivity. If he is in a personal life, a lot of people who are depressed in a personal life will say, I think they are just unable to participate in family life. And they accumulate a lot of financial strain because they're not being productive. And they're struggling with every task which requires attention. So that really impairs. The wives gets very annoyed, the children get very annoyed. They don't understand somebody's going through depression. They think he's become very lazy, and they are very angry with them. Very difficult for people to understand somebody's going through a lived experience like this, which will actually impact on their cognition. And in a social life, they're unable to participate in any social life. They're completely withdrawn. I've seen people with depression, totally not in the scene for a long period of time. And when they meet, they're also socially very irritable. They're not the pleasant people to deal with sometimes. So I think at the moment, we have Dr. CRS walked us through the journey of how antidepressants came, exactly in the way the slides show, SSRIs, TCAs, SSRIs, SNRIs, MAOA inhibitors in between, and other kinds of drugs and multimodal antidepressants. Whatever they are, you look at the side effect profile, almost all of them are filled with side effects. This is the daunting concern for people who consume these medications. This is a worrying concern for them. One of the reasons why they want to discontinue with the medication, one of the important reasons why people want to discontinue medication and relapse again and again is because of the side effects. So we need to consider side effects. That's why Dr. Jagdish will be addressing that particular problem. So what do current treatments do? I do understand current treatments are useful. Otherwise, we will not be having a business. We will not be able to manage people. They treat emotional symptoms very well. When it comes to sadness, anxiety, irritability, anhedonia, the lack of enjoyment, suicidal ideas, even hopelessness, inappropriate guilt, all could be effectively managed with the current medications. What are difficult to treat, as I said, was the cognitive symptoms. Difficulties with attention, concentration, short-term memory, long-term memory, decision-making, planning and organization, which is called as executive memory. And I think thinking speed, judgment, all these are very difficult to manage. Current medications do not address that. And also, some of the physical symptoms can actually become worse. People say that I was fatigued to begin with. After the medication, I'm more fatigued. I'm eating more now. I'm sleeping more now. I have completely become dysfunctional sexually. I earlier heard loss of libido. Now it looks like I can't get even married. They have headaches, stomach problems. Pain is one of the presenting symptoms. Some of the pain symptoms increase. And then the psychomotor retardation that Dr. Thomas Subramanian has talked about, which is one of the things that will get lifted with the imipramine, it's not even getting addressed because many other people become psychomotor agitated, actually. So these are the things that can get worsened with current antidepressants. So before I conclude, I want to really give you some glimpse of where this whole thing will go to be evolving. This is my most famous slide. There is never a talk on depression in which I have not shown this. I'm in love with Koffer and his article because it really makes you to understand the neural substrates behind depressive disorder. If you look at the neural substrates behind depressive disorder, that will give us some idea about where the future treatment will go. If you look at some of the areas here, first of all, I'll talk about the subcortical areas to begin with. The subcortical areas are the amygdala and the ventral striatum. And these, all of you know, are involved in the reward circuits. And I think many people's emotion is related to reward processing. Somebody, like Dr. Thomas Subramanian comes today, he always has a kind word for people. I feel very good after this meeting because Dr. CRS talked very kindly and Dr. Prashad Rao and Jagdish are such good friends. I met them. And that's the reward processing and emotions become better. So that is dealt with the subcortical areas of amygdala and ventral striatum. And then the medial structures of the prefrontal cortex, namely the medial prefrontal cortex, anterior cingulate cortex, orbitofrontal cortex. These are the ones which actually regulate the emotion automatically. We get up in the morning, feel low for no reason. Many of the depressive people will say, I have no worries at all. I'm actually, everything is settled in my life. I just don't know why I'm feeling so miserable. Why I'm feeling so bad about myself. I can't understand this. This is called automatic regulation of emotion, which is not controlled by any environmental factors. It's within. And those are in the medial part of the brain. See how the brain is structured. One that is medial is not connected to the environment. Is actually controlling the automatic regulation of the emotion. Subcorticals are controlling the emotional processing, reward processing. And look at the lateral structures of the prefrontal cortex, dorsolateral and ventrolateral prefrontal cortex. They are the ones who are connecting to the environment. I lost in business. I'm getting depressed. My wife actually, have lots of conflicts with me interpersonally. I have a problem. So these environmental factors constantly that's happening around the person is also regulating the emotion. This is called voluntary regulation of emotion. That's impeded by the lateral structures of the prefrontal cortex. So that's the neural systems which are relevant for depressive disorder. This gives you a clue tomorrow for neuromodulation techniques of how treatment for depression will emerge in the future. Second, I think this is the knowledge that was common even in the Mayer Grass time when we read the textbook, but it was very, very small in text. We didn't really understand the connection between inflammation and major depressive disorder. Today, in the past 10 years, if there is one aspect which has grown very strongly, it is the connection between inflammation and major depressive disorder. For example, we know that the stressors are the most important ones that mediate depression. If you have to single out a factor which mediates depression, everybody will pick out that psychological stressors. That's why depression was very high during COVID time. Whenever people face stress, that's when the depression increases. So stressors, even in a euthymic individual, but if he is vulnerable, sets off inflammatory processes. An inflammatory process seen by increased pro-inflammatory cytokines and the differences in the allostatic load. And what does this inflammation and pro-inflammatory cytokines lead to? They lead to many things, which is disturbing almost all the neurotransmitters within the brain and also certain axes within the brain, which are all relevant for depression. For example, it activates the HPA axis. It increases the glucocorticoid resistance, which is very relevant in depression. It modulates the neuronal activation. That's why the cognitive dysfunction is occurring in this individual. It also activates the indolemin pathway, and the third, it decreases the serotonin availability and increases the excitotoxicity. It also decreases the neurogenesis. That is why it decreases the long-term potentiation. That's how the stress mediates. And then there is an upregulation of SERT and upregulation of that. We know that they are very critical factors in the pathogenesis and neurophysiology of depressive disorder. So in a way, inflammation alone can explain the etiopathogenesis of depressive disorder, all lead to what we call as depression. My gut feeling is at least a subgroup of major depressive disorder, what we call as major depressive disorder today, is actually belonging to inflammation. There could be some more which probably will not be explained by inflammation. This is the latest work published in 2020 in Neuron by Burrell's group. This is a fantastic work. In between, the circles in between are the ones we are familiar with. Whenever there is a depression, like the long list Dr. Ramasubramanian, produced, either targets serotonin, or targets dopamine, or targets norepinephrine, or targets glutamate, like ketamine that you was talking about. So these are the monoamines and other neurotransmitters that are being targeted. And some of which each one explains different symptoms. What are the serotonergic neurotransmitter disturbances? What are the symptoms that they lead to? What is the dopamine disturbance lead to, like motivation and sociability? And norepinephrine is more to do with energy and fatigue. Some of the things are overlapping. For example, the psychomotor retardation that they alluded to is a combination of neurotransmitters. So some of the neurotransmitters combine together. That's why they will not respond to an SNRI. They will require a dual action antidepressants. That's why many times you choose a dual action antidepressant for some of the symptoms. Like, for example, somebody has anhedonia, psychomotor retardation, significant sleep disturbance. And I think we sometimes prefer a combination drug rather than. So you can easily understand from this particular work that they have presented, not only the neurotransmitters involved and what they produce. More important is how these various symptoms can be linked to some of the inflammatory changes that are taking place. This is a new kind of a work. So if you look at the peripheral, squares that are, there in the boxes that are there, you suddenly realize a lot of these inflammatory biomarkers are actually linked to either a serotonergic disturbance or a dopaminergic disturbance or a norepinergic disturbance or a combination of it. This is a very important one because where the search is going on, we are looking at biological markers. People begin to question us and say, why do you make a diagnosis of depression in me? What is your criteria? It's a subjective criteria. I don't think it's a science. So we need to come up with biomarkers to say, like how diabetics are, diagnosed with a blood sugar or, that's a biomarker. Blood glucose level is a biomarker. We need biomarkers. One of the important biomarkers that will emerge is the inflammatory biomarkers. So we all know that CRP is a very quick inflammatory biomarker. Is cutting across board. I think as a single inflammatory biomarker, CRP is going to be extremely useful because in conditions where CRP is elevated, certainly that is a subgroup where inflammation may be a very important factor. In conditions where CRP is not elevated, probably that subgroup of depression is not the one which is due to depression. So the treatment modality will become entirely different in future. This is a fantastic slide because it's a complex heterogeneous disorder of today. We know that genes are important, whether it's some of the candidate genes in the neurotransmitter genes we're looking at, or the circadian rhythm genes or the clock genes, or the molecular level disturbances in terms of inflammatory cytokines, or the impaired regulation of HB axis, or growth factors and neurotrophic factors. But the neural system that I talked about, this is how the pathology is going from a gene to molecule to neural systems. So our understanding is becoming better and better, which will pave way for addressing the unmet needs of depression. So to begin with, do we require antidepressants, newer antidepressants? Very much yes, because the current treatment is not effective. We have to have more effective treatments. Our current treatment is not addressing the residual symptoms, which are residual symptoms are the ones which impact the functioning. Third, current treatment is also not very tolerated. So we need more tolerable drugs. So I want to end the presentation by saying what we look for in the future. I am in the end of my career after being in psychiatry for 40 years plus. But I still think I'm very hopeful the new generation will be lucky to have novel medications that can address many of the problems that I alluded about. I will also think of a day in which anti-inflammatory agents will play a significant role, at least in a subgroup of people with lived experience of depressive disorder, for whom inflammation was a very important factor. And I think neuromodulation is where I'm getting very excited, because neuromodulation, because the more and more we understand the neural substrates of depressive disorder, we become much more scientific and focused by giving RTMS in targeted areas and deep brain stimulation for some unfortunate individuals who really have a protracted problem in targeted areas. That is where the future is. I'm pretty excited to look at the future. I hope I can live to see this kind of developments that happen in this field. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I once again want to thank my chair, Dr. CRS, and then my colleagues, Dr. Prasad Rao and Dr. Jagdish, for giving me this opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Suresh Kumar, for your excellent presentation. As usual, always your presentation, usually it will be informative and it's powerful, and you simplified even the complicated matters, and everyone will be able to understand your presentation. So thank you very much. And again, for the question, I will have it after the presentation of all the three speakers. Now you have opened a Pandora box about the current unmet need in pharmacology management of depression. Now the ball is in the court of Dr. Prasad Rao, who is going to talk about the real evidence. Now I request Prasad Rao to present.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Now it is my great and it is my great privilege to introduce Prasad Rao to the august audience. And he is one of the very senior psychiatrists and a very good clinician, academician, and also he is a founder director of senior consultant of Asa Hospital, one of the premier psychiatric institute in Andhra, and the president of Asian Federation of Psychiatric Association. And in fact, he is the president elect for 2019 to 2022. And he is the president of Indian Psychiatric Society in 2016. And he is the president of the Association of Private Psychiatry. And he is the president Society of Bipolar Disorders of India. And he had several rewards for his research activities. He is organizer of many national conferences, international conferences, published 180 papers. And also he is my very close friend, well-wisher of mine. And I request Prasad Rao to present his paper.
Thank you, CRS. I think you have said so much, but I think you should have just said he is my friend, my younger brother. And Suresh, it's really wonderful to the last 3-4 slides and your futuristic projection. I'm happy to say that in right now in ASHA, we have 3 neurostimulation technique, the high-end one, which can actually talk about what you said in the last 3 slides of your presentation. Right now, we can focus the sites by using a simple modified MRI technique and then give a high-end, high-dense RTMS. And we have just got it and we are very excited about it in the ASHA hospital. Having said that, I would just borrow the last slide of your presentation. Why do we need new antidepressants at all? I think you have said so nicely. One, the less response rate. Second, residual symptoms remain, especially the cognitive symptoms and negative symptoms. And finally, lot of side effects actually prevent our patients to take for a longer time. You said so nicely, and I don't want to spend too much time on that. But the basic thing I would always say is that this molecule, vortioxetine, today I'm going to only talk about the evidence and evidence and evidence about this molecule and what do we learn. And I'm really proud to be part of this drug development. I have participated in 4 of the drug trials of vortioxetine. So that way I did have a peep into the starting of this molecule. The first antidepressants as told by CRS so nicely in the history is the tricyclic antidepressants. But then the SSRIs came and then the melatonin was sold in Sweden to begin with, but somehow did not take. The real good molecule came back after SSRI is obviously the escitalopram, which stands as the top molecule of today. And then came our first SNRI in 93, venlafaxine. But I think agomelatine is the other class molecule which somehow did not take up, and maybe we'll get something in the class. And vilazodone. And following this, now you had the vortioxetine, which I can show in this slide. This is probably the multi-serotonergic drug, but more important, as you can see, is it has the agonistic wing here. Having said that, this is a molecule which I'm showing. It is both an inhibitor, start with a SERT inhibitor on here, and then you have an agonist at 5-H2-1A, partial agonist in HT1B, serotonin 1B, fully antagonist at 1D, and again fully antagonist at HT3, and fully antagonism at H27. As just now told by Suresh Kumar, the receptors all are not alike. Each have their specific action. And I would focus these 3 important totally antagonistic 3, HT1D, HT3, and HT7. This molecule actually differentiates from all the SSRIs. And maybe this SERT one, the inhibitor of the SERT, probably adds a little bit. But for me, this molecule's uniqueness comes from the 3 important serotonergic antagonism. The 7 is for the cognition, H3 is again for cognition, and H3D is again for the sexual side effects. Now, luckily, as you see, the agonism at H2-1A is indeed might contribute a little bit to the side effect, but that's luckily tolerance developed within the 1 way. Now, having said this is one molecule at the stage of US FDA approval had 9,700 patients involved in the clinical program. In the recent history of US FDA, so many molecules in this many trials was probably not there. 17 short-term trials, 3 specially investigated, and totally 2,987 patients open label long-term studies right now contributes to whatever I'm going to talk in the next few. It has probably clearly has an evidence at this level, major depressive disorder. There are partial evidences in OCD and anxiety disorders. The recommended dose is about 10 milligrams. Mind you, in this drug development, it was used up to 80 years. So initially, even right in the early stage, right now, it can be used with a safety. Now I'll focus on the next 4 or 5 important summaries of the mood symptoms on major depressive disorder. I think this is to begin with, the best data which has come, what is called as Alvarez study or vortioxetine for patients with moderate to severe depression. This is a 6-week RCT comparing with placebo, and I'm going to show you here, it clearly differentiates, as you can see in this slide, at the week 2. And again, at week 3 and week 4 and week 6, the differentiation is much clear at this point of time. In fact, this is one trial in which they compared with venlafaxine And you see that there is a subtle difference between venlafaxine and vortioxetine, both at 5 milligrams and 10 milligrams. What this story of this study shows is that first, it is clearly an early response, which we can see in this study. And this is compared to venlafaxine, slightly better, though not statistically significant. So it is clearly established as a molecule for severe depression. And in this sub-analysis of this study, it has clearly shown that the high anxiety rates scores are also have come down at the end of 4 to 6 weeks. So this Alvarez study, apart from other studies, has clearly. Now I'm straight away going into the meta-analysis of the multiple studies done, as I showed the 19 studies done. Now I'm showing the 11 short-term study. Now this is in a way a summary of all the trials. What you find, this is the earlier first proof of the concept at 5 milligrams. But as you can see, at 10 milligrams and 20 milligrams and 15 milligrams, it is definitely beating. And as you can see here, in none of the study, placebo scored over the molecule. That is point number one. And mind you, as already told by Suresh, that in these trials, and I'm going to show you the next two trials in which they went more specifically into, remember, unmet needs of depression. Now, I'll go to the next slide. Now, in anxiety, does it improve? I mean, this is again a meta-analysis of all the studies done, reported by Baldwin in 2016. And remember, all the studies, they have used HAM-A as a parameter as well. They didn't take the anxiety scores of HAM-D, but predominantly in all these trials, they have used HAM-A and HAM-D2 and MADRS. So all the three parameters. And you can see it is better than placebo by at least 2 to 4 points, which is fine. At 95 CL, it is a very good differentiation from placebo. So these are multiple studies. Now, if you see the non-US studies, in fact, have a much better, as I can show you with these arrows, when compared to the US studies. There has always been a criticism in terms of evidence that in US patients, they are paid for the clinical trials. So a lot of patients in depression trials, you get a placebo response mainly because a lot of them are not real patients. But it is not non-US means majority are from India, Asia Pacific, and some Eastern European countries like Russia and all. What is clear is that we clearly differentiate the anxiety score. So vortioxetine improves anxiety in MDD. Then I'm coming to the further analysis of short-term study data, which differentiates between, again, these are the further studies. This is a more recent analysis done, and this also clearly differentiates. What it shows is that 20 milligrams and 50 milligrams, you actually have a better differentiation. I'm showing you these last three. More than 10 milligrams, you can see a very clear differentiation. So the take-home message from this evidence is, obviously, we have to go up to 20 milligrams, and that actually differentiates. Now, this is one long-term study which is started with 24 weeks and 36 weeks. Vortioxetine reduced the proportion of patients who suffered and achieved remission in 50% compared to the placebo. Remember, Suresh has told us in the story, less than 40% actually, or one third hypothesis and remission. In the studies at the approval level itself, more than 50% of patients did achieve remission with vortioxetine, and this differentiated from the placebo. Now, this is another study in which they compared from SSRI, wherever the SSRI or SNRI did not show a benefit, they took that group. Remember, Suresh again told in the story of evidence when he said that a majority of patients do not respond, taking the clue from the STAR-D and other trials, and they were taken into the study, and vortioxetine, in fact, by the end of 4 weeks, more than 50% have achieved, and they at the 8 weeks and 12 weeks, majority, almost 2/3 achieved using standard technique and it is statistically differentiated, separated from agomeretin 2. So this is something which the last evidence which I'm going to show you is, do we have evidence in above 65 years? And this is again a pivotal study because majority of time it was compared only to placebo, but here in this study they compared to duloxetine and active. Remember, duloxetine also has similar kind of a serotonergic action and response with vortioxetine, and that too they used low dose. And the take-home message there is it effectively reduces depression symptoms. But in the large meta-analytic study, one more point is it definitely helps the cognition. Then I'll come to the next. Does vortioxetine has efficacy? And there are 6 good studies in which major depressive disorders were studied. This slide was shown by Suresh. I do not spend too much time on that, but I want to show this animation only to prove that patient functioning is definitely impaired because of cognitive impairment. And Suresh has very nicely talked about DSST, and that is the same thing was used in these clinical trials. In fact, most of our patients talk about I can't concentrate, I forget everything, I can't decide to anything, my brain gets blocked. These kind of examples of attention, memory, psychomotor speed, and executive functions impairment was very clearly there in these trials. And these 3 important trials, which also includes one in the elderly, as you can see, the third one, the FOCUS trial and the CONNECT trial. And if you can see here, in this, they have compared this vortioxetine with duloxetine and 2 doses of vortioxetine. As you can see, both have shown a significant DSST scores, performance improvement, and even in the elderly. So the take-home message is this is one molecule which does have evidence, both subjective and objective improvement of cognitive function. And compared to duloxetine, and this is much more clear. In fact, there was another group of studies done by Roger McIntyre from Canada, who has studied again a similar, this is post USFDA approval, and in which we have very clearly shown that the cognitive improvement because of vortioxetine, especially at 12 weeks, is quite significant. Then I'll come to show to you what is the average responder rate with vortioxetine. Remember, our friend and my friend, my elder brother Suresh has shown that typically in a star D responses, what was the pattern? But when come to the large number of studies, here you can see the 608 patients. This study was used 1:1:1:1:1, vortioxetine at 15 milligrams, 20 milligrams, 10 milligrams, and duloxetine. It obviously bet all the 3, and 57% achieved response, and at 20 milligrams, it's even more. And remission, and this is the take-home message. Almost 40% achieved remission at short follow-up studies. These are the 3 months and 6 months follow-up studies. So having said this, it seems to be much higher than the previous molecules at some level. It relieves multiple MDD symptoms. And my own clinical experience with the past Brinterex, which was costly, I did have experience with MDD, OCD, and anxiety disorders. I would say it has a good response. I'm not saying it is an all solace, all solution molecule at this point of time, but my own evidence. So early efficacy and beneficiation is the window which I would like to take you as a lasting message. And responder rate is definitely higher, and remission rate is definitely better than the SSRIs. I leave my presentation now. I would hand over to CRS. Now, last part, my other colleague would actually contribute to the efficacy in terms of side effects. Thank you very much, CRS.
Thank you, Prasad, for your wonderful presentation. In fact, for many of the Suresh Kumar's apprehension and anxiety regarding this drug, and you have showed a lot of evidence-based data about the efficacy of this drug. But one thing you have not answered is about the side effect profile. That topic comes to the court of my friend, my senior colleague, Dr. Jagadish Koth. In fact, it is my great privilege to introduce Dr. Jagadish, who is the past president of IPS Karnataka chapter and the past president of IPS South Zone, and his Abhay Hospital, an exclusive neuropsychiatric center. It is a premier institute. It is a premier institute in the Karnataka, and his area of interest is psychiatric comorbidity in alcohol dependence and post-histamine psychiatric comorbidity and role of buprenorphine in tobacco smokers and chewers. He is an excellent person, clinician, practitioner, and research. And now I request Jagadish sir to share his views on the new advantage in terms of side effects in the management and efficacy.
Thank you. Thanks to Dr. Ram Subramaniam for an excellent introduction, which probably partly true. And by now we had Dr. Suresh Kumar. Is it audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes,
so,
sir.
Dr. Suresh Kumar has set the ball rolling with an excellent presentation about depression. I'll not go into that. Three things he told. One is about emotional issues, cognitive issues, and physical disability secondary to depression. These are the three areas which need to be basically addressed. So in that context, Dr. Prasad Rao went to discuss about a drug which is effective compared to, and how different from SSRI to SNRI. When these two people have covered extensively about this molecule, what is left for me was the question. So in that context, side effects like any other SSRI, having nausea, vomiting, little bit of diarrhea are all there. But what is the advantage of having this drug? So that is what I wanted to speak. So now coming to, hope I am audible.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Because now coming to, there are a couple of issues which Dr. Prasad Rao has already presented, but I am going to talk about in a clinical setup. That's why I'm not going to talk about any slides, and I will be going on extempore. Two case anecdotes I will give you. One, a police officer, young gentleman, 26 years, he was also having some sort of an anxiety and depression prior to marriage. So for 9 months, he was on SSRI, recovered, happy, and he got married. Within 2 to 3 weeks after marriage, this gentleman came back. Doctor, I got engaged the moment I got IPS. I was fixed with my marriage, and I was having all the anxiety, etc. All the symptoms have gone. So I said, let me go ahead with my marriage. What happened after that? That is what is the question. Within 3 weeks, he came back. Though I am so enthusiastic and everything, doctor, somehow I am having difficulty in performing. And I personally feel to share this with my wife that I was on treatment with SSRI, and I was also treated. So then after a detailed evaluation, gradually I tapered SSRI and restarted with, started him on vertioxetine. This gentleman, ever since I started on vertioxetine, has never turned back and continued to take, both in terms of his work efficiency and his sexual functioning. Many a times he came back. He was started with 5 milligrams. We went up to 10 milligrams. With 10 milligrams, his mood was good and his sexual functioning was good. And however much over a period of 1 year, I requested, can I taper and withdraw? He said, doctor, with pressure of work and my family life to balance, this drug is making me better. Even if it is 75 rupees, it doesn't matter. So I'll go ahead with it. So that is one case anecdote. Second, a gentleman who is 24 lakhs. Usually they talk about per annum, though nobody talks nowadays about how much they earn per month. So a software engineer, again, had depression with some OC symptoms, but OC symptoms were not predominant. it was predominantly MDD. So this gentleman was also on SSRI. If the first gentleman was on escitalopram, this gentleman was on sertraline. So he was on the maximum dose. His symptoms improved, but always he was two things combined. He was working from home because of COVID, and he was also having difficulty in concentrating, frequently taking a break. His mother and uncle accompanied. So they were telling, doctor, every half an hour, this gentleman gets up, wants a cup of tea, something, goes out, comes back. He's unable to focus. So they were worried whether this gentleman will lose the job. These are the two case anecdotes. With this, I want to summarize what is the benefit of using vertioxetine in today's practice. A lot of companies have launched, a lot of companies have started already talking about the vertioxetine. I just want to summarize what is very clinically important. One thing, Dr. Prasad Rao has already told the efficacy of this drug. In no way it's inferior to an SSRI or an SNRI. One, because the cost kept us away from extensively using this molecule in the past. Today, the cost benefit, when we weigh both, it has more advantage and on par with the other medications, antidepressants in terms of cost, but we will see, is there any benefit? So I decided to discuss on 6 parameters. First and the foremost, the second example which I gave, cognition. Is there any direct benefit of this molecule on cognition is the question. Dr. Prasad Rao made it true. There are 2 controversies in this area. One, as the depression improves, cognition is supposed to improve. So is it elevating depression with this molecule benefited the patient to improve his short-term memory and cognition, or is it independent of it? Here I would like to tell my audience, there is enough evidence to quote. It is not just elevating the mood, improved cognition. It is the mechanism of action of this molecule, improved cognition. First, when the drug was initially took for trial, rat experiment showed, yes, it was enhanced acquisition and retention. Also, it reversed the memory. So vertioxetine started working. Then we had 2 evidences how this molecule works. So this, when the same drug was used in human beings, so it has improved executive function, attention, processing speed, and learning and memory. What is the evidence? It has enhanced activity of
Sir, I think Dr. Jagdish is having some connectivity issue. We are sorting it out. By the time you can continue, sir. I'm calling Dr. Jagdish.
Here is meanwhile, you can do a bit of summary. Once he joins, we can do it here.
So that now the 2 speakers, they have completed their presentation, Suresh Kumar and as well as Prasad Rao. Now the forum is open for audience. If you want to ask questions, they are ready to answer. Any questions to Suresh Kumar, to Prasad Rao?
I think there was one question asked by Dr. It came in the chat box by Victor D. Souza. The question is, how safe is it in elderly patients with past history of myocardial infarction or pacemaker insertion, particularly with those severe anxiety? What is the maximum dose? The other question is, does it improve depression and anxiety together? So Victor, the data right now is among the 9,000 clinical trial patients, almost 2,000 were in the elderly age group, and there was no serious adverse events. And in this case, in the elderly, they did have data in which there was a past history of MI as well. There were no serious adverse events in the clinical trials. And as we take the log of vortioxetine, at this point of time, no serious drug-to-drug interactions with any of the cardiological drugs. And the dose you asked is between 5 to 10 milligrams is the suggested dose. We can definitely go higher, but they say start with 5 milligrams and go to 10 milligrams. The only reason why there was this scare is because of the side effects. I think Jagdish has joined us.
Yeah, sorry, because of some interruption. Now, coming back to the most important one and less discussed about is about the sexual dysfunction. So again, here, one of the hypotheses is when the depression improves, the sexual function is also supposed to improve. But whether this molecule, vortioxetine, has any improvement in terms of sexual dysfunction. So this was compared with the duloxetine. It was tested on a couple of things: decreased libido, abnormal orgasm, delayed ejaculation, erectile dysfunction, and even in females, anorgasmia. So on these parameters, the drug was tried and it was evaluated in detail. So preclinical research indicates that 5-HT receptor subtypes may be involved in regulation of sexual function. That is why vortioxetine is one drug which benefits in sexual function. It is dose independent, whether the patient is on 5 mg or 20 mg. It is dose independent. Patient will benefit with vortioxetine in sexual dysfunction. So this is the one which scores above SSRI and SNRI. So this was seen in all across. So we have a large number of population between the age of 25 to 45. These are the people who are very silent to discuss. And if they come with their spouse, they are a little more hesitant to talk. This is one drug effective for depression in MDD, also to benefit in their sexual dysfunction. This is about third one. One is about cognition, second is about stroke, third is about sexual dysfunction. The fourth most important one is the sleep. So whenever there is a sleep disturbance, there are a lot of drugs, whether SSRI or SNRI, can cause sleep disruption. This is one drug has shown that either it has very slow or not much of sleep disruption while on this medication. Vortioxetine increases brain 5-HT levels to a greater extent than SCRT inhibitors. So vortioxetine regulates sleep. Vortioxetine regulates sleep. This vortioxetine 5-HT7 receptor antagonism could have been beneficial in terms of regulating the sleep and avoiding fragmentation of sleep. So it also benefits in improving the sleep disruption. Next comes is body weight. We are always worried about metabolic. A small percentage of patients, either on escitalopram, can have hyperphagia or craving for carbohydrates and can put on weight. 6 weeks to 6 month studies have shown on vortioxetine not much of weight gain in these patients. So not much of metabolic syndrome is not induced by vortioxetine. So we have another evidence for this is that there is it's a weight neutral and it has not much of implication on weight gain. So what I want to tell is it improves cognition because of its multiple receptors it acts on what I told about initially. There's multiple levels it works. And second, cognition improvement even in elderly, patient with CVS, no sleep disruption, sexual function improves, and lastly, cognition. So keeping this as the profile, this drug, because of its affordability and accessibility, because multiple companies have launched, I think this is one drug the psychiatrist can try to know themselves about the advantage of this medication over existing SSRI and SNRI, because we have learned about the efficacy of SSRI, we have learned about the efficacy of SNRI, but now we need to know, because of its affordability, probably if we can address all these benefits to the patient, especially between the age of 25 to 45, where they are expected to work better in intellectual job, where the sexual function matters, where the sleep matters, and all other things like weight and metabolic syndrome. Keeping these things in mind, I strongly recommend keep our mind open. Let us learn about this medication. I have gone through pre-clinical trials in animal studies as well as human studies in the post-marketing. In both the things, all these parameters have improved. So I want to request our professional colleagues, keep your mind open. There is an advantage over the other one, and keep using this between 5 to 20 milligrams. Probably our patients will benefit. I thank the organizers for giving me an opportunity. I told Dr. Prasad Rao, I'm not going to talk about slides. Probably I will talk about directly to the audience to know about the advantages of this medication. Thanks for forgiving me for not using any slides. And Dr. Suresh Kumar's initial introduction and Dr. Prasad's flow of medication, I have concluded that with these advantages, now let us keep this open. And I'll thanks to Dr. Subramaniam sir to take over.
Thank you, Jagdish sir, for your wonderful presentation. Because your presentation, it is your practical experience that that we wanted much. Because you highlighted two important cases which you have handled, and you addressed all the important side effects which experienced by the other antidepressants. For example, cognitive defects, sexual function, sleep disturbance, body weight, and all these the side effects you answered very well. And I think you are the powerful promoter for this molecule. Now, there are two questions has come. One is for Prasad Rao and another is for Prasad Rao sir. Some patients who are already on escitalopram, SSRI and SNRI on the heavy doses, when they are having a partial improvement or when they are having no improvement, how to start with the vetiquaxetine? Whether we'll have to taper the dosage of SSRI or SNRI, then we will have whether we have to start with the vetiquaxetine, and if we are going to start with the how to taper the SSRI drugs, one, and second, in which dose we'll have to start and how to proceed.
I think that's a beautiful clinical question. From the evidence point of view, there are at least 2 clinical trials in which partial responders to SSRI who are continue to use SSRI, vortioxetine was added at 5 and 10 milligrams and 20 milligrams. They started with 5 in the first week and then went to add-on drug. And the evidence in that trial is around 40% more responded over the 6 to 8 weeks time. That is the evidence point. But if you ask me a clinical question, I would personally believe that they are already can be said as a partial responders, if at all, or non-responders, if you may. It depends on where the patient is. If it's totally non-responders, my suggestion is to cross-taper. How to cross-taper? Start with 5 milligrams of vortioxetine, increase to 10 milligrams by the end of the week, and then escitalopram can be cross-tapered by reduction in the same fashion from 10 milligrams brought to 5 milligrams and stop at the 1 week. So this is the best recommendation given by many of the guidelines, especially the CanMed guidelines too. The second important point you asked is whether you can totally stop escitalopram suddenly and start here.
Yeah.
The evidence is the evidence is if you suddenly stop escitalopram, there will be some mild withdrawal. So it's generally to cross taper is the best. These are the 2 suggestions I can give it to you.
Thank you, Prasad Rao, sir. Then there's another question, especially with respect to the sexual dysfunction. Bupropion, it has got a least sexual dysfunction. And also, vilazolone also, it has got a least sexual dysfunction. So, in what way this vetioxetine superior to those two drugs?
Vertioxetine and bupropion have the same efficacy. They are compared to placebo, they are better. So bupropion and this both will have the same benefit of less sexual dysfunction. But these studies which we have seen are all compared with SNRI like duloxetine and placebo. When compared to these two, this has stood up above better than the sexual dysfunction was very minimal comparable to placebo or less than that. So bupropion and comparison, there are studies between comparison between bupropion and vertioxetine, not much of difference. But when it comes to, tell me, Prasad, can
I think you have said the answer quite correctly. The most beauty part of the sexual side effects part is the sexual side effects both in the drug and the placebo are same. It is 3 to 4% in most of the trials, and up to 4%, less than 5% in vortioxetine. That's why if you want to have a clear evidence, this actually matches the placebo in terms of sexual side effects. And the total number of studies in which patients were put on this molecule actually tells us that this does not cause sexual side effects because they followed for 6 months and 1 year. So that is the take-home message. So there was one or two more questions, CRS. I think Dr. Savita from Chennai wanted me to answer. What is the ideal dose of 10, 15, 20 milligrams? Is it used in the treatment of resistant depression? And the third question is in anxiety and OCD. Madam Savita, there are three important questions which are most practical for each one of us. The ideal dose is between 15 and 20 milligrams in most of the clinical trials. At 20 milligrams, the efficacy is only slightly better than 15 milligrams, but side effects are slightly more in terms of gastric side effects. Now, regarding the treatment-resistant depression, we do have only 2 trials in which this molecule was added to the already existing either SNRI or SSRI, and we have evidence to be shown. So at this point of time, whether it is a candidate to be used in treatment-resistant depression, I think we can use. Now coming to the anxiety, and we have evidence, but OCD we don't really have evidence. In anxiety disorders, we have clear evidence that 10 to 15 milligrams are very sufficient. It takes roughly 4 to 8 weeks for the reduction of 10 to 20% in the first week, and more than 20% of anxiety scores to 30 to 40% in HAM-A scores by the 6th week. So this clearly has evidence for anxiety. Now, in most of these trials with anxiety disorders, they did not use any benzodiazepines. The benzodiazepines were not allowed. So we clearly have interaction. Very good support for anxiety, but not for OCD at this point of time, evidence-based. But offhand, we can use it as a off-label trial.
In addition to what Dr. Prasad said, when there is a partial response to SSRI, adequate dose, or SNRI, one can try this molecule because the mechanism of action is different. So more, I don't call it as resistant, but definitely when there is a partial response to the other 2 molecules, one can try this.
Yeah. Any other question?
There are multiple questions which came to my thing. I will answer because there seems to be on a lot of questions on kidney safety and drug-to-drug interaction. That has to be answered. It is quite safe in both. In 9,500 cases, nobody died during the trial. And this is a very rare occurrence for an antidepressant drug trial, especially for 6 months. The second point is somebody had really a very interesting question. In the clinical trials, agomelatine and duloxetine, which are considered as a flop molecule, have been used. Why is that so? The answer is very simple. The duloxetine, you can say the serotonergic profile and the SNRI profile matches to some extent this drug during the drug development. But they have used duloxetine not 20 milligrams, they have used up to 60 milligrams and 80 milligrams too. So they have actually used a good dose of that, and that way it is very useful. Now, the two questions from a psychiatrist from Salem. SSRIs are known to cause agitation in the initial days, and we at times add benzodiazepine to help this. Does vortioxetine cause similar agitation? The answer is clearly no. There is no increase of anxiety in the first week. Or second important, are there any issues of discontinuation symptoms? Again, clearly no. Vortioxetine is one molecule. Because the US FDA clearly asked for them the drug discontinuation. In all the trials, 1 week after the following the stoppage, they were assessed, and none had any withdrawal symptoms similar to desvenlafaxine and venlafaxine. So this is for sure. What is the total duration of therapy of vortioxetine? It is something like, I think everyone, Suresh would be the best person to answer, but to my best of my knowledge, I say it's like any other major depression. We really don't know how long, but we give for as long as we think after the patient gets a total remission. Our aim is to get remission, as he said. Role of the Karthikeyan has asked, what is the role of vortioxetine in severe depression? In fact, there are 4 studies which has very clearly shown on that. Are there any side effects on switching or stopping? I think we don't have evidence on that. We can't comment. There was one very provocative question. Is this molecule side effect free? Absolutely no. This molecule does cause nausea during the first 2 weeks, but discontinuation due to nausea did not occur. And most of the clinical trials, what happened is the nausea disappears without using any molecule. In only 10% of them, they have used either local antacid or some kind of pump inhibitors. Now, how long do we have to use to wait to increment in the clinical trials? Based on clinical trials, within the second, third week, we can increase the dose, but the target dose should always be 20 milligrams or 15 milligrams first and then going to 20 milligrams. Then there was again multiple questions asked by a lot of people. What is, in your view, combination of vortioxetine with other antidepressants? Right now, with the data we only have, if you want to talk, is escitalopram we have, and then SNRI we have, venlafaxine. These are the 2 molecules in which partial response, they continued that molecule. So we should only restrict for the evidence-based, means these are the 2 molecules we have the evidence at this point of time. Suresh, you can give your comments because there are a lot of questions I answered.
Talk about the drug interaction. Strange enough, one of the things that I find difficult with this drug, let's say compared to escitalopram or desvenlafaxine, is the presence of drug interaction with this drug. Particularly large amount of this drug is metabolized by cytochrome 2D6. So I think we should have a fair knowledge about this inhibition drugs which can cause inhibition, as well as drugs which can cause, like inducing. The drug that can cause inhibition, typically the one that we will be using is like a paroxetine or a fluoxetine. So if you want to combine with an antidepressant, these 2 drugs I want to avoid. You want to avoid fluoxetine, you want to avoid paroxetine. If you ever use that, you need to give a dose which is half the dose of what you will give. Instead of 10 milligram, you give a 5 milligram. Instead of 20, you give a 10 milligram. So that is something we need to understand. Antifungal agents, again, are classical inhibitors. Probably when somebody is taking fungal drug, ketoconazole, etc., I think we should reduce the dose. Inducers, I think we should be a little careful with the population that come to us. A lot of these people are on steroids for whatever reasons. I think steroids are very good inducers. There, this drug is not going to work, and then you don't give up, you just increase the dose. But when you increase the dose, you don't have to be aggressive. Never increase beyond 3 times the original dose you talk about. And again, another drug that's commonly used is rifampicin. In this country, I think a lot of people have tuberculosis. That's an inducer. So I think this is some knowledge we should have only when dealing with this drug. So with regard to elderly, some questions like post-stroke and other things, I'm little not sure because we don't know the data for it. Without the data, it's premature to comment about it. I'm sure many people will experiment with that and then tell the world that I think didn't really have, nothing happened. We are quite safe with that, as long as the drug interaction part of it didn't happen. These are my added comments, Dr. Prashad. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Sarath Kumar from Coimbatore wanted, my doubt is whether vortioxetine is effective as monotherapy. Is there evidence? No, I think the straight answer is almost 85% of the clinical trials, except for those 2-3 clinical trials, of the data which we have is only in single effective. And my own patients of 1,000, which I've used in the past 4-5 years, almost 85% of them are single drugs. So I think evidence clearly points out for the efficacy, and the side effects also points to the efficacy. But my own suggestion is, accept we should always use this molecule as a single to start with, and then after some time, if you think there is non-response or partial response, anybody's guess on what rational polypharmacology. Likewise, I think Sarath has also asked about use of pregnancy and lactation. Right now, we don't have evidence, so we can't comment on that. Likewise, using in adolescent, right now in child and adolescent also, we don't have evidence, so we can't comment on that. Is house, then from Salem, again, a group of psychiatrists has asked this question. We at times add benzodiazepines to help to reduce the anxiety and agitation. Does vortioxetine also need this? Not as a routine, definitely, but in an individual case, yes. Yes, we might have to consider for a short term. Karthikeyan again asked, in the psychotic symptoms, does vortioxetine? The straight answer right now is we don't really have efficacy at this point of time in psychotic depression at this point of time. Are there any effects of switching or stopping vortioxetine? Switching, I think we did cover in my presentation. And another question asked by Prasant Jalak is, in ADHD, is it useful? No, I think we don't have evidence on that. Then how long we have to wait for increment? Usually my own recommendation would be 1 week to increase from 5 to 10 milligrams. The advantage of starting at 5 and going to 10 is that the nausea is relatively less. That's what in most of the 11 studies done after the first 6 studies, they use this strategy of starting 5 milligrams and going to 10 milligrams at the end of the 1 week. And I think Riya Gupta has asked me a very interesting question. Which drug to choose in between mirtazapine and vortioxetine in depression? I think at this point of time, these kind of questions is a little difficult to answer. See, most of us in this country use SSRI or SNRI. Majority use SSRI as a starting, but now we have vortioxetine in our hand. It is not a true SSRI. It's a mixed bag. So that is one. It's like vilazodone, slightly different from vilazodone. So this would be a first-line drug. I think it is going to be first-line drug.
I have few things to tell, Doctor. In addition to Dr. Prasad, the important thing to note is when there is a partial response to either SSRI or SNRI, it is better to use vortioxetine as a monotherapy. Most of the studies have shown the efficacy in monotherapy rather than in combination. So instead of polypharmacy, let us try to understand and go up to the 20 milligrams dose and try vortioxetine as a monotherapy. Second, in addition to what Dr. Suresh Kumar asked, there's an article published in 2015 in that the vortioxetine against placebo and all, the adverse effects in elderly with CVA. Okay, the adverse effects range from 15.8 to 10 points, etc., etc. The effects range from 15 to 10 points, less than placebo. In the elderly, only nausea was found higher than placebo. Effects on arterial blood pressure and cardiac parameters, including ECG, QT interval segments, were similar to placebo. Elderly depressive patients on vortioxetine showed improvement versus placebo and other active comparators in auditory, verbal learning, and digital symbol, etc., etc. The inclusion criteria admitted cases with mild cerebrovascular disease. Conclusion: the mechanism of action, the efficacy of depression, and safety profile and elderly was true. So it can be used. There is that's what I dug out, that in 2015 there is an article where they have used in cerebrovascular symptoms.
Yes. One last question I would answer before I hand over to CRS. Tejas from Aurangabad has asked me, there are multiple trials between 5, 10 and 15 milligrams versus placebo. Is there a difference in terms of efficacy compared to other doses among the 3 doses? The best efficacy is between 10 milligrams and 15 milligrams and 20 milligrams. But with 5 milligrams, there is an efficacy, but a significant difference between placebo and so all the 5, 10 and 15 differed and 20 milligrams differed from the placebo, but the maximum or better efficacy with tolerability as a score occurred between 10 to 15 milligrams. And the 20 milligram side effects marginally increased in total numbers of side effects. CRS.
So we are coming to the end. In fact, the success of any program will be gauged by the number of the questions asked. And today, the symposium will be flooded with the number of questions, because the whole credit goes to the 3 wonderful speakers, Suresh Kumar, Jagdish, and Dr. Prasad Rao. And beautifully, they explained everything in a simple way in their own style. And in fact, for any successful drug, any drug to be successful, 3 important criteria should be present. 1, efficacy, accessibility, and affordability. But this drug, it met all these 3 criteria. For example, it is cost effective. Jayadisha beautifully tell how it was cost previously, now how they reduce the price. So it is cost effective, and also it addresses all the needs of the depressive patient. It addresses the cognitive aspect and sexual dysfunction, and also it regulates the sleep. And also another important thing is its body weight. So in short, in the armamentarium of the psychiatry, there is another drug comes. It is a wonderful drug. It is an affordable drug, and all the psychiatry you can try with the new drug. So thank you very much for giving an opportunity to chair this important session. In fact, presented by 3 eminent speakers. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And the last question to Suresh Kumar, sir. In spite of your busy schedule, in spite of your busy commitment, how you are young and dynamic. Are you on any vetioxetine, sir?
If you recommend, I will take, sir. Otherwise, no.
For cognitive aspects, sir, or second side effects, sir? Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Rupmar, sir.
Yeah. So thank you very much. I just take the pleasure of giving the vote of thanks. First and foremost, as Dr. CRS sir said, brilliant speakers today, Dr. Suresh Kumar sir, Dr. Jagdish sir, and Prasad Rao sir. Brilliant speakers have brought so much of wealth of knowledge and information, almost 200 years of experience combined together. So thank you very much. Also, the session was made so lively and interesting by the moderator and the chairperson. As CRS sir said very exactly correctly, that there were more than, I made a count of it, more than 80 questions. First time I'm seeing such a huge number of questions, and very patiently has been each and every question has been answered. I'm sure that the audience would have enjoyed it and have had immense amount of knowledge. I also thank all the chairpersons and moderators in the 11 centers across South and West, Dr. Rayara sir, Dr. Chandrasekhar from Bangalore, Dr. Raja Kumar from Coimbatore, Dr. Satyanathan from Chennai, Dr. Maheshwari, Madam from Salem, Dr. Ramanujam and Karthikeyan, Dr. Paneer Selvam and Dr. Abdul Rahman, Dr. Ramakrishnan from Trichy, Dr. Sanjay Sauji from Aurangabad, Dr. Prakhar Jain from Mumbai, and Dr. Sanjay Deshpande from Nanded. So this is, thank you very much, sir. And this is the, it's not only on the online, the hybrid, almost 300 people have joined this meeting. So that makes a total count of 500 plus, as exactly predicted by Dr. Prasad Rao before the start of the session. And I also thank Linux Laboratories sales, marketing teams and the management for their unwavering support for putting this program together, for extending the support for scientific and academic sessions. Last but not the least, my baby. I openly request and appeal for your esteemed support for this new baby of ours, Vertica, which is a very, very fond name by all the psychiatrists across the country. I mean, it has become, they're very fond and like they love the name of Vertica. It's so simple to remember and prescribe. Affordable, very, very affordable. 5 milligram is costing hardly 9 rupees. And it's available at the length and breadth, supported by almost 600 strong field force, our sales team, who's making it available every nook and corner, and the most trusted brand. And with 15 years of our dedication to psychiatry, we are almost completing 15 years of our dedicated service with 50,000. We are reaching out and serving 50,000 healthcare professional doctors in India alone. And currently, we take immense pride in saying that we reach out to 10 million patients annually. And we support almost more than 1,000 families, employees, and extended family also. And we reach with a very robust distribution channel of our products, Vertica, across the country. And with this, I once again appeal all of you to please take up Vertica in a big way and give us that honor of first time the molecule on the brand will be the #1 product in Vertioxetin. So with this, I once again thank all of you, especially Dr. Prasad Rao sir. They have taken so much of time, who has been with us, hand-holding and planning this meeting every step and giving us a lot of ideas. Thank you very much, sir. Without your support, we would have not put this wonderful meeting of 500 doctors into place. Thank you very much, and good night to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good night. Good night.
Good night, sir. Good night.